Mercedes have already turned this new era into something Formula One did not want to see. Total control early, both championships in their hands, and a rule book that already looks less certain than it did on launch day. This should have been a story about one team getting it right. Instead, it has made the whole sport look nervous. Because while Kimi Antonelli and George Russell keep stacking points, the FIA is already in urgent talks about energy saving, super clipping, and possible changes before Miami. That is not confidence. That is a warning. Max Verstappen made the mood even sharper when he called these cars anti-racing and said they were not fun. And that matters, because drivers like him do not speak like that unless something feels wrong underneath. What no broadcast covered is this: the debate is no longer only about feel. The FIA is now reviewing how these power units deploy and recover energy after only 3 races, with key talks coming before Miami. When the people who built the rules are already searching for fixes, the alarm is real. That is why this story already feels bigger than one rough start or one loud complaint. Mercedes are on 135 points, Ferrari on 90, and Red Bull way down on 16, which means this rulebook is not only changing how the cars behave, it is already changing who controls the season. But here is where it gets complicated. The real fight is not only about the meetings, it is about which team learned to handle this chaos first, and which one is already paying for it before Miami starts. Mercedes are not only leading this new era, they are exposing it. Kimi Antonelli has already won twice. George Russell won in Australia. Together, they have pushed Mercedes to 135 points after only 3 rounds, while Ferrari sit on 90 and Red Bull are stuck on 16. That gap is not a small early swing, it is proof that one team has understood this rulebook faster than the rest, and that changes how every fan should look at what comes next. That matters because a regulation debate only becomes truly dangerous when it starts shaping the title fight this early. Ferrari still have enough pace and enough quality through Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc to stay close, and McLaren are still in range if Miami resets the balance, but Red Bull are already paying a much bigger price than anyone expected. The points table is telling a brutal story, and the data tells a completely different story from the public line that this is only a drivability issue. Because once one team starts winning while another starts slipping, the whole conversation changes. This stops being a clean technical debate and turns into a fight over who adapted first and who got caught out. Mercedes fans see confirmation, Ferrari fans see a real opening, Verstappen fans see a rule book that is dragging their team backwards. And before anyone talks about fixing this sport, the next thing that matters is understanding what these cars are actually doing on the straights. The strange part of this new era is not that the cars are slower in places, it is how suddenly the feeling can change in the middle of a lap. One moment the car looks alive, the next it looks like it is being managed instead of driven. That is where the frustration is coming from. These power units now lean far harder on electrical power than the old cars did, and once that balance swings too far, the driver is no longer attacking the straight with total trust. What the FIA is discussing right now tells you exactly where the problem lives. Reuters reports the meetings are centered on lift and coast, energy deployment, and super clipping, the moment when the battery effect fades and the car stops feeling clean at full speed. This is not some hidden garage rumor anymore. It is the center of the official conversation before Miami, and that is where this story gets complicated, because a car that changes character like that does not only hurt racing, it can also create dangerous speed differences. And once you reach that point, the issue is no longer about whether fans like the look of the new rules. It becomes a question of whether the sport pushed too hard into a system that feels unstable when the drivers are right on the limit. That is why the next layer matters so much, because once safety enters the discussion, Formula One loses the luxury of pretending it can wait. Oliver Behrman's Suzuka crash changed the tone of this whole debate. Up to that point, the noise around these rules could still be treated like a messy start to a new era. After that crash, the mood turned darker. Suddenly, the arguments about drivability and power delivery were sitting next to a real incident at very high speed, and that forced the FIA to look at this from a different angle. The story was no longer only about performance, it was about risk. Nicolas Tombazis has already made it clear that the FIA sees a need for specific changes. Even while insisting the concept itself is not broken, Martin Brundle has pushed even harder and called for immediate action before Miami. That tells you everything about where this story is now. When senior voices inside and around the sport start talking talking about urgency instead of patience. The usual slow-moving politics of Formula One start to speed up very quickly, and that creates pressure from every direction at once. Drivers want something that feels more natural, teams want something they can trust. Officials want to calm the situation without admitting the foundation needs tearing up. That is the trap, because everyone can see the danger now, but solving it is a lot harder than spotting it. The next question is not whether the FIA wants change, it is how much change the sport can survive politically. Formula One cannot simply rip these rules apart, even if some drivers clearly wish it could. Too much money, too much planning, and too many long-term promises are tied to this engine era. The whole package was sold as a smarter future, with more electrical power, less of the old complexity, and more road relevance for major manufacturers. That is one reason Audi came in and Honda stayed committed. Backing away from that now would not look like refinement, it would look like retreat. That is why the FIA is talking about adjustments instead of a reset. Tombazis has already framed the likely answer as changes to specific aspects, not a rewrite. Reuters says the strongest option on the table is software and settings, not a dramatic hardware change. That matters because it means the sport is trying to soften the sharpest edges of the problem without touching the core idea too openly. Nobody in that garage expected what came next, a rule book under pressure before the first Miami lap even starts. So the sport is boxed in. It needs a visible improvement, but it cannot afford a public admission that the whole direction was wrong. That leaves only one path: make the cars behave better fast enough to calm the drivers and protect the new era. Which sounds simple until you ask what the engineers are really trying to change in time for Miami. Inside the garages, this is not about magic fixes or a brand new concept arriving overnight. It is about making the cars feel more predictable in the moments that matter most. The FIA meetings this month are aimed at energy settings, drivability, arm, and the way deployment behaves over a lap. The window is tight, but the gap before Miami has given the teams and officials enough time to study what went wrong in the opening races and decide what can still be cleaned up quickly. What no broadcast covered is this: Miami is not waiting for a revolution, it is waiting for proof that the sport can reduce the worst habits of these cars before the next big pressure point arrives. The next race weekend is a sprint event, which makes every session matter more and gives the whole package less room to hide. If the behavior still looks awkward there, the noise around these rules gets louder, not smaller. That is why the teams will arrive in Miami with very different emotions. Mercedes will want the patch to protect the advantage they already built. Ferrari will want it to reopen the fight. And Red Bull will want it to stop the bleeding before the gap becomes embarrassing. And that sets up the part of this story fans care about most: who gains if Miami works, and who gets exposed if it does not. If Miami smooths out the worst of this package, Mercedes could turn an early lead into something much heavier for the rest of the grid. They already have the fastest start in the sport, with Antonelli leading the drivers and Russell right behind him after Japan. A calmer, more predictable version of these rules would only make that platform stronger. That is why the coming changes matter so much. They are not only about fixing a problem, they could lock in a championship advantage. Ferrari fans should see the same moment in a different way. And Hamilton and Leclerc are close enough that one clean swing in form could turn the season back toward them, especially with Mercedes still carrying the pressure of being the team everybody now expects to beat. McLaren are also still alive, but they need the next phase of this season to bring them back into the picture quickly. The real danger is Red Bull, because every week this stays messy is another week the gap grows. So Miami is not a simple pass-fail test. It is a split in the road. One result gives the FIA breathing room and keeps the title fight wide enough to feel alive. The other gives critics proof that the sport reacted too slowly. And once that happens, the final question becomes unavoidable. What does this whole crisis say about Formula One itself? Miami will not answer every question about the 2026 rules. But it will answer the one that matters most right now. Can Formula One steady this new era before the doubts get bigger than the championship itself? The FIA has already confirmed the review is active, the proposals are moving, and the target is clear: improve the way these cars behave without tearing the concept apart in public. That is the mission now, and the whole sport knows it. If the changes work, the FIA gets time. The drivers get a little more trust back. The title fight stays about pace, execution, and pressure instead of turning into a weekly argument about whether the rules are fit for purpose. But if the same strange habits show up again in Miami, the story gets much bigger. Then this stops being an awkward launch and starts looking like the first real crack in a rulebook Formula One spent years selling to the world. That is why this moment feels so heavy. The issue is no longer only whether the cars are fast enough or modern enough. It is whether the sport still knows how to move forward without losing the thing people came to watch in the first place. Miami will not end the argument. It will decide whether Formula One still controls it.